I'm not a fan of drama, but I never expected to become the target of an entitled parent. My name is Max, a 25-year-old guy who enjoys spending his free time at the local community center playing basketball. It's the perfect place to unwind and get some exercise while meeting new people. One day, while I was shooting hoops, a woman and her son entered the gym. The kid was around 10 years old, and the woman was probably in her early 40s. I didn't think much of it at first, but soon things started to get weird. The woman, who I later found out was called Karen, started to give me weird looks. I ignored her and continued playing, but she didn't stop staring. Eventually, she came over to me, tapping me on the shoulder. "Excuse me, young man, but could you please give my son a chance to play?" Karen asked in a condescending tone. I was taken aback. I've never encountered someone so rude before. "I'm sorry, but I'm in the middle of a game. There are other courts available for your son to play on." Karen huffed, clearly not happy with my response. "But he wants to play with you. Can't you just let him join in?" I looked at the kid, who seemed disinterested in playing basketball, and then back at Karen. "I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable playing with someone I don't know. It's nothing personal." Karen rolled her eyes. "Fine, but don't think you're too good for us just because you're a good player." I chuckled sarcastically. "Don't worry, I won't let my skills go to my head." The rest of the game went smoothly, and Karen and her son eventually left. However, things were far from over. A few days later, I received an email from the community center manager asking me to come in for a meeting. When I arrived, I found Karen and her son sitting at a table with the manager. "Max, thank you for coming," the manager greeted me. "I understand there was an incident involving you and Karen a few days ago." I nodded, wondering where this was going. "Yes, but it wasn't a big deal." Karen cut in, her voice dripping with entitlement. "It was a big deal to my son. He was so excited to play with Max, but Max wouldn't let him join in." I sighed, trying to stay calm. "As I explained before, I'm not comfortable playing with strangers. It has nothing to do with your son." Karen glared at me. "Well, that's not good enough. You need to learn how to share, young man." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm the one who needs a lesson in sharing." Karen's face turned red with anger. "How dare you? My son deserves to play with you. You're not the only one who uses this gym." I was getting fed up with Karen's entitled attitude. "I'm sorry, but I can't force myself to play with someone I don't know. If your son is interested in basketball, I suggest you sign him up for a league or find him a coach." Karen stood up, slamming her hands on the table. "You're so selfish. You think you're better than us just because you're good at basketball. Well, let me tell you something, Max. You're not as great as you think you are." At this point, Karen was clearly losing her temper. She even tried to hit me with the basketball, but I dodged it. The community center manager quickly stepped in, standing between us. "That's enough, Karen. This behavior is unacceptable. You need to leave." Karen scoffed, grabbing her son's hand. "Fine, we'll go, but don't expect us to come back to this place." I watched as Karen stormed out of the room, still fuming. I couldn't believe how entitled and unreasonable she was being. I turned to the community center manager, shaking my head in disbelief. "I'm sorry about that," I apologized. "I didn't expect things to escalate like that." The manager smiled sympathetically. "It's not your fault, Max. Karen has a reputation for causing trouble. We won't be allowing her back in here." I breathed a sigh of relief, glad that this whole ordeal was over. But I couldn't shake off the feeling of anger and frustration that lingered after the encounter. I thought back to my childhood, remembering times when I was bullied or excluded by other kids because of my height or looks. I had worked hard to develop my skills and gain confidence in myself, but encounters like this made me feel like I was being brought down again. But I refused to let Karen's entitled behavior bring me down. I continued to come to the community center, playing basketball and enjoying my time with other people who appreciated the game and respected each other's boundary. And as for Karen, well, she may have lost her temper that day, but she also lost any respect I may have had for her. I was grateful to have avoided any physical confrontation and was proud of myself for standing up for my own boundaries and rights. I'm 16. I'm in high school. There is this one kid in my math class that I sit next to. We're not really friends, more acquaintances, but I'll chat with him from time to time. He invited me to his birthday party, and I accepted because I didn't really have anything better to do. It was pretty chill, just me and a few other people I had seen around school. We mainly just jumped on his trampoline and played flag football, etc. Till it was time to do presents and eat cake. My asthma started to act up. It's springtime, so all the pollen in the air usually causes me to have more flare-ups. After cake, they all went back to the trampoline, but I hung back due to my asthma. I used my inhaler, but it didn't really help. I called my mom and she came and picked me up. We ended up going to the ER because my asthma had gotten so bad and my inhaler wasn't helping. They gave me a few breathing treatments and I ended up be fine. I saw him the next day at school and we started talking. After getting to know him a bit more at the party, we started to become more of friends. He invited me to hang at his place after school, and I accepted because he seemed cool. We were hanging out in the living room playing games when in walks, entitled, "Mother, I can't believe you came back here after that stunt you pulled." Me? What? Entitled, "Mother, you know, leaving in the middle of the party. If you didn't want to come, then you shouldn't have. I can't believe you would disrupt everyone by abandoning everyone midway through." Me. Ma'am, I did really have fun at the party, but I left because my asthma was getting bad. Entitled, "Mother, don't lie. I saw you using your inhaler. That should have made you fine. You're just making up excuses for your disrespectful behavior." Me. No, I had an asthma attack and ended up having to go to the ER. Entitled, "Mother, whatever I don't want to hear your excuses anymore. Just don't be so rude next time." She walked away. He apologized for her. I said it was cool and we kept playing. I guess this isn't one of the worst stories on here, but I still can't believe she is pissed that I was rude for abandoning the party. Me and him just hang out at my house usually to avoid entitled mother, and we're friends now, but I just wanted to share my encounter with entitled mother. It all started when my friend, Jane, and I decided to spend a lazy Sunday afternoon at the park. We were both in our early 20s and enjoyed the occasional outing to enjoy the fresh air and sunshine. As we were strolling around, we noticed a woman with 2 young children. The kids were playing on the swings while the woman sat on a bench, scrolling through her phone. Nothing out of the ordinary, until her son started crying and she completely lost her temper. "Get off the swing right now!" she yelled at her son. "You're embarrassing me in front of these people." Jane and I exchanged a look, both feeling a little uncomfortable. The woman's daughter, who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, looked up at her mother with big, teary eyes. "Mommy, can we go home?" she asked quietly. "Not until your brother stops crying," the woman snapped. We tried to ignore them and continued on our walk, but the woman's outburst had caught the attention of several other park-goers. One man even approached her, asking if everything was okay. "Mind your own business," the woman barked at him. That's when things really started to go downhill. The woman went on a tirade, yelling and cursing at anyone who dared to even glance in her direction. Her children looked terrified, and I couldn't help but feel sorry for them. As the commotion continued, a crowd started to gather. People were taking out their phones and filming the woman's meltdown. I felt a little guilty for doing the same, but I couldn't help it. This was just too ridiculous. After what felt like an eternity, the woman finally stormed off with her children in tow. The park-goers all breathed a sigh of relief, glad to be rid of her. Jane and I exchanged another look, both feeling a little shaken up by the whole ordeal. "That was insane," Jane commented. "I know, right?" I replied. "I can't imagine what that poor woman's kids have to deal with on a daily basis." And that was that. We didn't think much more about it until a few days later, when I received a message on Facebook from the woman in question. She accused me and Jane of stalking her and her children, claiming that we had followed them around the park and taken photos of them without their consent. It was all complete nonsense, of course. We had barely even looked at them before the woman had started screaming. I tried to reason with her, explaining that we hadn't done anything wrong, but she wouldn't listen. She just kept ranting and raving, accusing us of being terrible people who enjoyed tormenting innocent mothers and their children. I couldn't believe it. This woman had caused a scene in public, and now she was trying to turn it around and make us out to be the bad guys. It was ridiculous. So I've just come back from a coach trip from the UK to Disneyland, Paris. It was a wonderful trip apart from one family who decided they could do whatever they wanted with no consequence. To set the scene, me and my two friends have just arrived at the bus stop and are waiting for the coach. In front of us is a family of 4 adults and 3 children, a young girl around the age of 10, a boy also around the age of 10, and a teenage boy. All 3 are sat on the floor and are attempting to play a card game, however. The girl is screaming at the top of her lungs, telling the other kids how to play the game. The adults tried to intervene once, got sworn at by the child, and then gave up. Me and my friends exchanged glances before resorting to sending each other memes, silently voicing our discontent. Luckily, we were seated at the front of the coach and the family were at the back. We could still hear the girl yelling all the way, but we let it slide because, hey, we're going to Disneyland and they're probably just excited. We went on to have a wonderful couple of days in Disneyland, completely forgetting that this family even existed, until it was time to come home. You see, dear reader, we are broke, so we had booked a coach that left Disney at 8 p.m., arriving back in London at 4:30 a.m. It's a given that you'd want to sleep on the coach. Well, as we waited for our coach to come and collect us, there we were reminded of that child's piercing screams and shrieks as she ran around the car park and in front of cars whilst the adults once again did nothing. My friends and I exchanged worried glances, but it was only the beginning. Once on the coach, people started pulling out neck pillows and blankets, ready to attempt to sleep, but not that family. They talked loudly about their trip and complained that the coach driver hadn't put the radio on for us. People were already grumbling, but the family paid them no mind. When we reached Calais, it got worse. The driver asked for a volunteer to collect everyone's passports and bring them to the front. One of the adults, and the girl's mother, volunteered and had to sit at the front with the driver while sorting the passports. Well, the child decided that was an invitation to run up and down the aisle between her parents before loudly demanding that her mother sing Happy Birthday in Welsh. This was at midnight. After border control had checked our passports, the mother decided to hand some of them to her children, but that wasn't good enough for the little girl who kept screaming at her mother to give her more. Apparently, no was not a word she could understand, and she simply kept screaming. Even when people stated they were not comfortable with children handling their passports, the kids still got to hand them out. And then we finally boarded the ferry at 1:35 a.m., ready for a quiet crossing. We were wrong. Initially, my friends and I had sat in an area with a kids' play area. We quickly realized and relocated to a quieter area of the ship so we could try and grab some sleep. People around us were sprawled out on benches with blankets over their heads, and mothers had sleeping children in their laps. We found a quiet corner and started to doze off. Then we heard it, that same piercing shrieking, all from that girl. They were running up and down the length of the ship, shouting and shrieking as they went. People were being startled awake every single time they went by. Other children were beginning to cry because they were tired. The teenage boy was literally winding up the younger two, making them shout even more. The adults of the group were absolutely nowhere to be seen. Eventually, I snapped. After a particularly piercing shriek, I yelled, "Quiet, please! It is 2 o'clock in the morning and people are trying to sleep." Several other murmurs of agreement surrounded me. They went silent, looked at me, and ran off. I knew what was coming. We all knew. In marched one of the adults. Not the mother, just another one of the adults. "What did you say to the kids?" she demanded, loudly, of course. I said, "Quiet, please. There are people trying to sleep." I gestured to the people groggily emerging from their blankets to see what the commotion was. "If you've got a problem, speak to an adult. Don't shout at kids." "Well, where were you?" "Down there," she points. "They were at the opposite end of the ship." "So why weren't you with them?" "They're hyper. Kids are gonna be hyper." Again, It's 2 o'clock in the morning and people are trying to sleep. You should have come and talked to us. How was I supposed to know who you were or where you'd be? Whatever, just don't shout at kids. And then they left. Was it the end? Oh no, they continued their shrieking and running. When we attempted to find the adults as they had requested, they had moved and were nowhere to be found again. The girl also tried to stare me out a couple of times. I think she was trying to intimidate me, which is laughable. Eventually, the ferry trip came to an end, and I waited until the last possible second to get back on the coach so that they wouldn't have to walk past me. I was thanked several times by fellow ferry passengers in both French and English for my attempts to shut those kids the hell up. I do wonder how much of a problem it would have been if I woke their kids up at 2 a.m.